Hi everyone. So my name is Winter Rose 84 here on YouTube, but you can call me Renee. So this video is going to be a softly spoken ASMR video, but it is a little different to my previous ASMR videos. In this video, I'm going to be telling a story, and this story is about my life and my childhood up to a certain point. As you can tell, I have changed my setup just a little. I've put blankets around me to try to stop some of the echo with the noise. So, fingers crossed that it works. I have filmed two versions of this video. This is going to be the second version. In one video, I have a candle that makes a crackle noise. So if you would prefer to watch that version, I will link it up here, but also in the description box. But this version is for those who may not find the crackle noise of the candle relaxing or soothing. But don't worry, you don't miss out on candles. I have in front of me another candle, and this particular one is a Yankee candle. This scent is frosty gingerbread. So, as I tell my story, you will still get to see the flames of the candle. So, hopefully, you enjoy this video and you can sit back, relax, and enjoy listening or watching at the same time. So first, before I start my storytelling, I'm going to light the candle in front of me. So, this story begins in the year I was born, and as most of you can tell from my name, that was 1984. Now, 1984 may sound like a very long time ago for some of you, but for me, it still doesn't feel that long ago. So, I was born in the southwest suburbs of Sydney, which is in New South Wales, a state in Australia. Both of my parents are also Australian and were born in a similar area to me. So when I was born, we lived in a house that was out in the southwest Sydney region. So it's considered the Greater Sydney metropolitan area. I don't really remember that much at all about this house. When we were young, we moved around a lot, my brother and I, and obviously my parents too. So I don't have that many memories that come to mind when trying to recall my childhood. Sometimes the memories are triggered from a photo or a story, And I don't know if that's because we moved around a lot or simply that I just can't really remember that many things. I don't remember a lot before I was around 8 years old, but I'm going to try to tell the story as best as I can. Some of the details may be slightly different to my Crackle candle version, but that's how a story goes. So, when I was born, I was the eldest child, so my parents had me, and I really can't remember much about that time. A few years later, we moved from Sydney, Australia, to the suburbs of Brisbane, which is further north, but still on the east coast, or the eastern side of Australia. We moved to Brisbane, or the Brisbane suburbs, but I'm just going to say Brisbane. And that's where my brother was born. My brother is 3 years younger than I am, so he was born in a different state. I don't remember a lot about Queensland, but there are some memories that I do have. So I remember going to preschool, which is different in other states. And because I moved around a lot as a child, this is called something different depending on where you live. So some call it kinder, some call it prep, some call it preschool. But essentially, it's where you go before you start primary school. So I do remember parts about my preschool. The biggest memory, I guess, that I can remember from my preschool is when they had family day or a fete, and there would be a long slip and slide, kind of like a water slide, but it's just plastic, along the grass, and they spray it down with liquid soap or something slippery and then wet it, and you would run and dive and slide along. They don't really do that anymore. It's too dangerous, and it probably was back then, but it was normal, so that was okay. I remember my next door neighbour, but also other friends I had from the neighbourhood. I remember my brother was a lot younger, or by comparison only 3 years, but he was quite young, and I would push him around in a cardboard box in the house. I remember we had a cubby house in the backyard. Another memory is the smell of sugarcane. So when they would harvest the sugarcane, or the cane fields would burn, it has a very specific smell, which is smoky and sweet. And I remember the smell. I remember the weather being warm and humid, but it didn't seem like it was as humid as I remember it being now. Even in Sydney, it is very humid. I remember the cane toads in the backyard. My brother and I would throw them over the fence. They are large, really ugly toads, but we would have empty land around the house and we would throw the toads over the fence. They're considered a pest in Queensland. I remember other little things from Queensland, but not too much more. I do remember the house that we lived in, and it helps to see photos. So we left Queensland and we moved to the suburbs of Melbourne, which is in Victoria, and that's on the south part of the eastern coast of Australia. And moving from Brisbane, where the summers were very warm and the winter was still fairly warm, to Victoria, Melbourne, where the winters are quite cold, it was very different for my brother and I. More for my brother because he was used to the heat. He hadn't lived anywhere else. So this would have been in the late 80s. This is where I went to kindergarten, which is before year 1 in primary school. And it may have been called prep. I'm not sure. There's different names. Again, different states, different names. You would start school at different ages as well, depending on which state you're in. But the main thing I remember from Melbourne was our house and the backyard. In our backyard in Melbourne, we had a giant apricot tree, and I remember climbing the tree. I also remember when it was bearing fruit, we would climb the tree and pick the fruit and eat the apricots, and my mum would make things from them. We also had another tree, and underneath the tree was a cubby house that my brother and I would play in, and a vegetable garden as well. I remember my brother and I would get peas from the pod and open the pod and eat the peas and throw the pod away because we didn't want to eat that part, just the inside. We would also steal the strawberries as they became ripe. I remember that we would take some of the vegetables or the leaves from the plants and we would create meals in the cubby house, or experiments with them, and that was fun. I remember some of my friends from primary school, from prep, and then a birthday party that I had where we had a fairy and a clown, and my mum, she would make cakes from this particular cookbook. I think it may have been a Woman's Weekly cake cookbook, which if you're around my age, you probably recognise the book. I think it had a train on the front cover, but I remember having a jewellery box cake, and then she would make a treasure box cake. She also made a swimming pool or a billabong with a caramello koala, and one of the doll cakes that were very common. But I remember that. I remember painting on the veranda. I also have a memory of a tea party that we had, or that I had, with my stuffed animals, my teddy bears, in the backyard. And this one I remember because it was the first time I saw a giant wasp. And I ran inside to tell my mum. Another thing that I remember about Melbourne was the weather. It was cold and we had vents in the floor, which my brother and I weren't used to. The warm air would be pushed through the vents to heat the house, and sometimes we would just sit on the vents and my mum would get mad at us for doing it. Not bad, just annoyed. But it was okay. But we were so cold. Oh, we were a bit wimpy. I also remember the front yard of the house, and there was a plant in particular that I liked. It was a green plant with tiny lace flowers. There were little white flowers that looked like they were made from lace, and I remember that one. I don't know what it was, but it was very pretty and very delicate. I remember going over to friends' houses and people down the street that we were friends with. But we moved again to overseas. We moved around a lot when I was younger, and I think in a way that may be why I don't have a lot of friends from when I was a child. But that's okay, because even though we moved a lot, and some people may see that as being a bad thing, I still think of all the things that I got to experience that other people never get the chance to. So I'm still grateful that I got to live the life that I did when I was younger. We got to travel. We got to see places that some people would never see, and do things some people would never get to do. So I still am grateful for that. This would have been in around 1991. We moved to Papua New Guinea. So in Papua New Guinea, we lived near Port Moresby, which is the capital or main city in Port Moresby. And this was the early 90s. So back then, it wasn't as it is now. It's still not necessarily a safe place to be. But back then it wasn't as bad as it is now, or as it's meant to be now. But you kind of get used to it living there. And even though I was young, so I was turning 7, my parents were still very open with my brother and I, particularly about safety and being aware of our surroundings, which I'm thankful for, that they, to a point, were very open with us about things like that. Obviously, things happened that I found out later in life that wouldn't have been appropriate to tell a younger child, but they still treated us with, I guess, the respect to be honest with us to the point that they knew we understood. And as a child, I was fairly mature. And I appreciate that they told us that. And I'm still aware of my surroundings now, and I still have habits now that are because of that. But I think that's a good thing. Where we first moved to was in a set of units. So a few people would live in like a compound, if you could call it that, a fenced area with several of these 3-story unit houses. And there would be guards stationed inside. And it wasn't uncommon, particularly for areas where expatriates I think, but expats, foreigners that lived there from anywhere around the world. There were a lot of Australians and a lot of people from the UK and South Africa as well, but mainly Australia in this case. They would live in these areas that would be guarded because it was still a fairly dangerous place to live. But we didn't really seem to notice. It was different because you went to the shopping centre, well, like a grocery store. It wasn't like here. But you would have to be escorted there. It was fine. My brother stood out though a lot because he had bright blonde hair, which some of the local people had never seen before. And it must have been scary as a child. People would want to touch his hair or would look at him. But it wasn't too bad. It was different for them too. In Papua New Guinea, there weren't many takeaway places. They had one which was called Big Rooster, which was meant to be like Red Rooster here in Australia. There were rumours about a McDonald's being built, and a sign went up, but it never got built. I remember there was a place near the beach on the main road, I think it was the main road, that made pizza. And it was good. And I got ham and pineapple, which I still like pineapple on pizza. Controversial, I know. But I remember that out the front of this pizza place, they had small turtles in a pond, and my brother and I would like to watch them. There was also a place, I think it may have been a service station, like a petrol station, and they would have diner food. It wasn't very good, but we would get tokens for prizes, so we went there. Occasionally in the outskirts there was a spaghetti house that we would go to, but you had to leave by a certain time because the area got very dangerous after dark. But that was another place we would go to. There were function centres, so I think it was called, I'm not sure what it's called now. The Aviate? I'm not sure if that's correct, but it was sort of like a swimming pool and a conference centre. I cannot remember the name, but we would go there for Christmases and things like that, and a lot of the other expats would go, so we would all go and swim and do things there. But the name escapes me now. I remember we would get to go to the islands off the mainland frequently. Well, it seemed frequently at the time. And they were beautiful with clear water, and we would go snorkeling, and there would be fish and turtles. We also got to go to picnic places with other people my dad worked with, and we would go up to the highlands or the mountains or whatever they were, and one of them was near the Kokoda Trail, so I got to go there, which not many people really do, and so I'm thankful for that. And I remember there was a big guard tower or a fire watch tower made from wood, and it was very tall, and my brother and my dad would go up there, but my mum didn't want me to go up there, so I didn't. It wasn't that stable. I also remember on one of the picnics, my brother and I found a giant snake skin. Thankfully, we did not find the snake. But at another time, we went to my dad's office because outside his window in Port Moresby, which was as big of a city as you could find there, a giant green tree snake just outside his window. It was huge. A lot of things happened there, and we moved to another apartment building where there were a lot of people from Australia. Across from us there was some Australian Federal Police that would live there, and there were other people from different businesses or companies, but I remember a few of them. And this was an apartment complex, so more like traditional apartment styles, but you'd all have your own door. And again, they would have guards, and occasionally people would try to break in, so you would have a guard stationed at your door. And this seemed normal at the time. Still scary though. And I can only imagine what it would have been like for my parents, because at the time they would have been younger than what I am now. And I can't imagine living there now at my age, particularly if I had two small children. So I really do appreciate what my parents went through, and my mum. There are a few other things, things that just seemed normal. It wasn't uncommon to have no electricity for quite a while, and occasionally they would just turn the water off, so we would have no running water. We would either have to go to the complexes, I can't remember what it was, Travelodge, I think it was the Travelodge was one of the places, and we could bathe there or shower there and do what we needed to. But I do remember that we would fill up pots with pool water from the pool in the complex and bring it back up the road. And my mum would heat it on the stove and put it in the bath so we could wash with warm water. It was also a place where you had to be aware of mosquitoes. I did get malaria. My brother got malaria. I can't remember if my mother did, but chances are probably. My dad, I think he ended up with dengue fever, which is worse. And somebody he knew passed away from getting that. I think sometimes it can spread and attack the nerves or something, or the brain. So it's fairly serious, which is something that you don't really have to worry too much about, in Australia at least. Maybe in the northern parts it can be a risk, but it's something that was a real risk in New Guinea. I remember the fetes that we would have at the school that my mum helped organise, and they were fun. The markets. I remember going to the normal markets, and we would buy billums, so bags like you see now, the hand woven bags. We still have some, and people would carry the shopping around, and you would see the locals carrying all kinds of things, and they would balance it on their head. It was incredible. I don't know how they did it. It was just amazing to see. And you would see them doing tattoos, like traditional tattoos, where they would tap the ink in. It was just very different, and I'm glad I did get to experience that. So we were meant to be there for 3 years, but in the third year, up to the third year, we had to leave suddenly because it was dangerous and we had been threatened. I didn't know that at the time, to a point. I remember my parents told us, and we packed, and I got to say goodbye to my best friend, and then we left back to Australia. At least my mum, my brother and I. We stayed in Australia, but my dad had to finish his contract, so he stayed. And that must have been hard for my mum. But we lived in a unit in the suburbs of Brisbane again. I remember we made a cubby house at the back of the unit in some bushes that had a hollow space behind them. And there would also be a macadamia nut tree. So we would get the macadamias and try to crack the shells using bricks. And if anybody has tried, you'll know that it's difficult to do. So we stayed there for a while, and it was a fine area. It wasn't dangerous or a bad area, but there was one night where my mum woke up and saw a light downstairs, and she thought that it may have been the fridge, like my brother or I had gone to get a drink. But when she walked past our room, we were both in there. So she went downstairs and noticed the front door was open, and that's where the light was coming from. And her bag had been opened and there was things everywhere. It turned out that several of the units had been broken into. But not long after that, my dad moved back. So when he moved back, we had the choice to either go to Hong Kong or back to Sydney. And as a family, we chose to go back to Sydney and stay onshore for a while. So we moved back to Sydney, and this was in the end of 1993. So a lot of this happened in a fairly short period of time. When we moved back, we were looking for a house, and during that time we lived in a motel, and the motel was a few bedrooms and a living space, so it was a fairly big place. It was for longer term stays. I remember some things from there, but a lot of it, they weren't good. It's just the memories I have. We weren't there for too long, but there for long enough. I remember we spent a Christmas there because I can remember getting presents. But when we were there, my brother got stung by wasps near the front door. There was a wasp's nest, and it turns out he was allergic. I also remember coming home and there was smoke, and we were worried it was our apartment, like our room, but it was across from us. Somebody had fallen asleep or had a cigarette on the bed and their apartment had burnt down. We ended up finding a house, and this would have been 1994, and I started a new school, and we ended up moving again in the late 90s when I was in high school, but we still were in Sydney, and that's still where I am now. But it had been the longest that we had lived in one place, and the longest I'd gone to a school for. I went to many primary schools, but that was okay. So, as far as the story time goes, that's where I'm going to leave it for now. And hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please do let me know, and I may be able to film the second part of my story. I would also very much appreciate any feedback. If you have a preference between the crackle candle or the non-crackle candle, that would help as well. Please feel free to leave it in the comments or send me a message. I hope you all enjoyed this video and it helped you relax, or at least gave you something to listen to, just for fun. And on that note, I hope you're all having a wonderful evening, afternoon, or morning, whatever it might be, wherever you are. And I'll see you all in my next video. Better put out the candle. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.